What up, meatheads? This is Travis, American Butcher, and this is the Meat Block Podcast. And if you're new to the show, I just want to say welcome. The Meat Block Podcast is a weekly podcast where Ryan, David, and myself take you through a topic in our industry. And if you're not familiar with that industry, it is the meat industry. All three of us has worked custom, retail, and slaughter, and have lived in the Pacific Northwest currently or in the past. This week's episode is Heritage Breeds. And if you own a small shop or if you're a farmer, you may find this episode very interesting. Also, if you're a chef. David was complaining, like he often does, about cutting heritage pork and farmers' expectations. And I said, you know what, David? Let's make that into an episode. And he's like, yeah, Travis, that sounds great. And I said, I know, David, it was my idea. And he said, well, Travis, you always have the best ideas. And I said, thank you, David, for recognizing my greatness. Well, that's not at all how it happened, but regardless, this was David's idea. And before I kick it off to David, I just want to ask one thing of you. Yes, you, the listener. Let's say your name is Tim. Now, there's probably some Tim listening to this being like, holy shit, that is my name. Well, even if it's not, head over to iTunes, type in the Meat Block, leave a 5-star review, and please leave a comment. Now, the show.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. In his way, the meat cutter is an artist. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
The earliest fossil records of a hog date back over 10 million years and were found in Africa. In 1539, pigs reached America thanks to Spanish colonies. Francis de Soto introduced them to what is now known as Tampa Bay, Florida. And maybe the Buccaneers would make it into the playoffs if they're named after, I don't know, a pig. The Tampa Bay Piganeers. I don't even know if that qualifies as a joke. These hogs quickly became an easy food source for colonists and Native Americans alike. These hogs would escape, become feral. Their tusks would grow out and they would start rooting crops. They made their way to New York, and farmers put up a giant wall to keep them out of their fields. This wall was later called Wall Street. Up until recently, the domesticated hog looked completely different than the distant cousin we know today. For centuries, people bred hogs with the fat and the lard to be just as important as the meat. The lard would help you prepare for winter. You could fill your lamps with it. You could burn it. You could use it to cook your meat with. You could use the lard to render and preserve meat to get you through the lean months. The largest hog ever domesticated and verified was 2,552 pounds. That could supply a small village with heat. Pigs are a rugged animal. They could survive in diverse climates. People recognized this, bred different traits in and different traits out, and developed heritage breeds, which were just called breeds because they weren't heritage yet. Within the last 150 years, the fat cap on a pig went from 3 inches to less than 1.5 inches. But now people are reverting back, which is not a bad thing. It's proven that darker, more red pork tastes better, but redder pork comes from a fattier pig, a more heritage breed. Now you're faced with a dilemma as a farmer or a consumer. You want something that tastes good. You want the best. But what are you going to do with that fat? Now, I've worked in this industry all over, not really, Vermont, California, and here in Washington. So like 3 areas. But every place I've worked that produces pork has always ended up with the same problem. What do you do with all this fat? A lot of times it ends up in rendering barrels where a company comes by and picks it up, and then usually you charge 10 cents for it to be picked up. But if you're a small facility, you usually charge or you usually get charged to have it picked up. And people always think, what a waste, and etc. But rendering facilities are actually what help make the industry sustainable, because even though it's not going to a consumer, it's going to be rendered down, and first cut's going to go to cosmetics, then it's going to go into dog food, like the solids, and then they make pellets for crop fertilizer. But when I've worked at a cut and wrap facility that deals with small farms or direct with the farmer, people are always surprised by their yield. That's when people get called out for, like, you stole my meat, or I gave you an animal this big, etc. Trust me, we're not stealing your fucking meat. You just don't know realistic expectations. And if it's not on a cut sheet, then you generally won't give it back, because we're in the business of how much we can get done an hour, because we're paid by the pound, essentially. And if it doesn't say it on the cut sheet, then you won't get it. I often hear the excuse, what about this? Or, I want all my fat. Trust me, we're swimming in fat. You don't want all your fat. I'll give you all the fat you want, but at one point you'll say no. And if you're listening to this and you say, you're wrong, I do want it, then you're that exception. You're that person, and good for you. You've found a market for it, or you're going to make all the soaps and etc. But it's not worth cut and wrap facilities really doing it. But some things you could do with these large fat back is these 3-inch slabs is you can make lardo. You could take it, which you would cure like a prosciutto. It'd be like a dry cured item, not cooked. And then you would take that and, shave it on top of a pasta. You could make whipped lardo, which is actually really delicious. You can make a savory one and you can make a sweet one. And you could use it like you would butter in the morning. So one day I'm working on a mobile slaughter truck in Washington, and I'm visited by this farmer. Well, not really a farmer. He just raised his first animal. To describe this guy, he had a trucker hat, a lip-in, a plaid shirt, and a sidearm. He was very cocky in the way he talked, and told me how he's going to change the pork that people buy in Whatcom County up here in Washington, in the Tri-County area. He got a free pig from his buddy who lived on the other side of the mountain. He was telling me how this is the best pork I'm ever going to see, and how this hog is going to be divided up and go out to different chefs. And he's going to try to get it into a CSA, and it's going to be beautiful. And now he had these big plans, how he's going to do this one hog, then the next couple months do 3 more, and eventually change the heritage breed that people buy up here in Whatcom County. He was getting very excited, and he got me very excited. And I'm like, all right, so what breed of hog is it? And he's like, well, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but it's a Mangalitsa. I was like, oh. Mangalisas are short, fat, curly. They have these weird, funny looking legs that they look like the wiener, like a fat wiener dog of pigs. And their hair is thick and curly, like it's covered in Brillo pads. In the past, working with these pigs, yes, I have worked with them numerous times. I was not blown away by this revelation. It was not a new breed to me. I worked for a company in San Diego that did heritage cross and specialized breeding with heritage breeds. And Mangalisa, Mulefoots, large blacks, red wattles, all that was on our breeding program. And this company truly made beautiful pork. And you can find that pork in Standings Meats down in West Hollywood. So go check it out if you're down there. Now, working with Mangalisas in the past, I was always worried that the stun would be terrible because the electric probes would have a difficult time connecting and making contact through the pubes that was that animal's hair. It worked fine. I also thought that scalding would be difficult on these animals, but my water kept at 140 for 4 minutes gave me a perfect result. I followed his cut sheets. He wanted everything from the pig, the organ meat. He wanted one picnic to be a picnic ham. He wanted one to be a boneless picnic roast. There were cutlets, boneless chops, bone-in chops, French racks, bacon, leaf lard, kidneys, trotter, skin, and back fat. He wanted 100% yield from the hot weight. Now, the hot weight is the weight you take when the animal is hot before you put it in the cooler. When he came by and picked up his boxes of product, he was ecstatic, brimming ear to ear, excited about his new life, his new opportunity, about being a heritage breed farmer, about being a Mangalisa farmer. I shook his hand and said, I look forward to doing business with you in the future. This next piece is by David.
Hey, gang. This week we're going to talk about heritage hogs and whether or not they work for your operation. In a world of effective marketing campaigns and unregulated descriptor words in the supermarket, the words heritage and heirloom bring with them an imagery of bucolic pastoral scenes, homesteaders, and the good life. You know, it's a throwback to the days of yore when people did everything correctly, supposedly. These words are meant to evoke the thoughts, older and vintage is better, and they sure don't make them like they used to anymore. I mean, many of us have just mindlessly or intentionally for profit or just to feel good sold heritage turkey, for instance, at Thanksgiving for $8.99 a pound or more. And people pay it. But why? Because supposedly they taste better. And they've been around for a long time, which means they must be better, I guess. Just like Great Grandpa's 14-pound cleaver and ultra vintage butcher block, it's not functional, but because it's old, we're going to keep it there in the shop. What if we at the Meat Block told you that the flavor of pork was dramatically more to do with an animal's diet than its parents' parents? Now, I'm in no way arguing for or against the virtues of conservation breeding programs, nor am I criticizing the decisions of throwback and modern farmers. If you want to live off the grid and have a hog on hand for 7 or 8 years, that's great. I'm merely asking, are heritage breed hogs, are they a good investment for the small producer selling retail or direct-to-consumer? And even more, are they practical for an average family looking for a hog share? Or are they strictly limited in availability to the mucky muck? Now, I suppose I'd like to clear a few things up. Heritage hogs can be most simply categorized into 2 major groups for our purposes here. First of all, heritage hogs in general, it's similar to heirloom seeds, right? Heritage breeds are defined by the Livestock Conservancy as a breed of animal that has a certain criteria of characteristics, like physical characteristics. They are bred to another animal of that registered breed to produce an identical animal. It's like heirloom seeds. It's open pollinated. You're breeding the same breed to the same breed. You're getting the same seeds over and over and over. You're not crossing different breeds for different characteristics. So in hogs, you've got 2 major types of heritage breed hogs. You've got lard animals and you've got bacon animals. Lard hogs, these are usually shorter in back length or loin length. They put on a lot more back fat than your average commercial breed, and they tend to grow up to slaughter weight much more slowly. They also take a lot more food to get to that weight, and we'll get to that in a bit. Lard breeds include large blacks, guinea hogs, kune, mulefoot, Gloucester old spots, and Mangalitses. These animals were originally hybrids, bred well over 100 years ago with the intention of fulfilling people's needs for that particular time in egg and economy. Lard was an inexpensive fat that was used for cooking and baking and just dressing general dishes in the home. It was used in North America and Europe the way we now use butter before the Industrial Revolution, or the Industrial Food Revolution anyways, when vegetable fats became a lot more available and they were falsely marketed as healthier. Aside from cooking, however, lard was also used as a mechanical and industrial lubricant. So there was a huge demand for lard all the time. In World War II, lard was being used in the process of making explosives, and this is when the vegetable fats really took over. There was a huge propaganda campaign about chemically extracted and expeller pressed vegetable fats to be, more heart healthy, better for you, which we've found to be completely opposite. In the last 20 years or so, chefs and home cooks and kind of artisans in general have recommitted to animal fats. But the demand for the product it's never really reached the heights that it once was. So there's a second type of old world breed, and that's the bacon breed. Now, obviously, not every traditional hog is going to fit perfectly into these categories, but it's a good way of looking at it when trying to establish what you want. Bacon breeds tend to be faster growing, quicker to gain muscle. And though you lose an inch of fat cap, you gain a longer loin, which is also larger in diameter, and my first butcher boss, Greg in Bellevue, Washington, always told me, keep the meat where the money is. And last time I checked, fat back versus loin muscle, there's a major price difference there. There's a higher percentage of leaner muscle overall, but they're capable of good marble nonetheless. The flavor of these animals is also potentially really excellent. Common heritage bacon breeds include, but are certainly not limited to, Tamworths, Red Wattles, which is one of my favorites, Berkshire, a.k.a. Curabota, a.k.a. descendants of Iberican hogs, Hampshire, and Yorkshire. Their feed conversion efficiency is superior to lard breeds. Knowing which category the potential feeders or breed stock you're buying, if you settled on raising heritage hogs for sure, that is, that'll help you decide on which breed you're after. There are, of course, drawbacks and advantages to hogs from either group. For a homesteader just looking to fill their freezer, you may want to consider a mulefoot or a Mangalitsa. These breeds take twice as long, if not more, to get to their proper butcher weight, and their ability to efficiently turn feed into muscle is, economically thinking, it's atrocious, if I'm being completely honest, in a lot of ways, especially the Mangalitsa. But if you're just a small family, you're not in a hurry, you don't want to slaughter once a year, then perhaps, if you have space and you want a living garbage disposal, basically, the Mangalitsas and the mulefoots and those other guinea hogs and lard breeds tend to be pretty good foragers that demand a variety in their diets. You might want to invest the time in a project like a Mangalitsa. If you're a small-time producer, though, like me, I'm not looking to invest that much time, resources, and energy to wait for my cash outlay to return. There are several characteristics that I take into consideration when choosing what breeds work for me on a particular piece of land. Everything from maternal instinct, parasite resistance, disposition, etc. But nothing takes precedence when choosing hogs over feed conversion efficiency. Now, whether I'm selling CSA hog shares, meat bundles, cuts, or whole carcass, I want an animal that will gain marble and fat within a reasonable amount of time and the least amount of resources possible. This way you can pass on that efficiency in the form of savings to your customers, It's important, in my opinion, and now I'm going to get kind of preachy here for a second, so forgive me, but it's important, in my opinion, if you talk about best practices, then you follow through with making a product that is attainable by the average customer, not just the upper 1% of eaters. I recently killed 2 mangalitas they both hung around I think they were 340 and 360. After all was smoked, cured, twisted, trimmed, packaged, the lean meat yield on these animals was less than 50%. Everything else was fat. It's great and all, but you're still paying an exorbitant rate for lard. It's delicious and nutritious, but a meal does it not make. You don't fill bellies with rendered lard. Not for $78 a pound plus processing, plus everything else. That's why it's important to document feed costs and usage on your animals, or to request it from your farmer you're going to be buying your stock from. Feed costs are typically 2/3 or more of the total cost of producing hogs. So of course you can cut down on that with alternative feeds, whey, byproducts of other farming ventures, compost for a homesteader, etc. But even small changes in feeding can really add up and affect the end product. There's a couple of basic formulas to find feed efficiency. We'll save the super technical stuff for another episode because we could, devote a whole episode to this. But at its most basic, though, feed conversion ratio, or FCR, equals feed intake over average daily gain. You find your average daily gain by taking your finish weight, subtracting your start weight, and dividing it by age. I've got a study that was done in Serbia in 2012 showing the efficiency of Mangalitsa hogs versus Yorkshire hogs. Both are heritage breeds. Both have a wonderful marketing campaign in favor of each. Mangalitsas are a crossbreed between 2 Eastern European pure, I guess they'd be like pre-heritage breeds. The Shumadinka and the Bakyoni, which no longer exist because their crossbred offspring was a better fit for the modern society at the time. Yorkshires were developed from original breed Leicestershire, perfecting their dimensions for sale in England in the mid-1700s. They showed up in the U.S. in the mid-1800s. So, these are both like bona fide heritage pork breeds. With the Mangalitsa, again representing the lard breeds, and the Yorkshires representing the bacon breeds, this study really shows that not all heritage hogs are created equal. In this study, they take groups of each breed and fatten them up to 132 kilos, which is their target butcher weight. Both sets of hogs were raised in a similar intensive farming operation. It took the Yorkshire hogs 227 days to reach butcher weight. The Mangalitsas were 540 days at the point of butcher weight. Given the added resources it takes to raise the slower growing lard hogs, the end cost ended up being over 200% more to raise from piglets to butcher. This price is not including the extra price of Mangalitsa feeders. You pay more for a more highly desirable breed stock, or rather feeder stock. So these piglets you're going to pay considerably more per head than something less desirable, like a Tamworth or a Red Wattle or a Yorkshire. That has a lot to do with being associated with the artisanal and the demand from chefs and all of those things. I'll share a link to this study as well. In an upcoming episode, we can talk more in depth about food conversion efficiencies of different species. But for now, you might be asking, what exactly does this mean for me? Well, let's say you're raising a heritage bacon breed. You feed it certified organic grains and legumes and maybe supplement with cull vegetables from your field. Let's say it takes you 7 months to get it to butcher weight. And you've determined that your selling price per hanging weight is $4.65 a pound, American dollars. In order to do the same with a slow-growing lard hog, you're going to have to wait 18 months and then charge $9.50 a pound hanging at a minimum to make your money. You're going to have to add processing costs to that. And by that time, your consumer is going to be paying $13 to $18 a pound for pork, especially since some of the lard, much of the lard hog's meat is best as curing or as value added. So you're going to have all those additional costs. And your yield of edible meat will be 45 to 55%, with 15 to 25% of the remaining total yield is renderable back fat and leaf lard. I mean, do you have a customer base that'll pay such exorbitant prices? if a Curabota, a large black, and Mangalitsa are all raised on the same feed, same land, same terroir, if you're an asshole, will you be able to tell the difference in the slice of the culatello? How about a vice first? How about a pork chop? I don't think so. Sure, maybe it tastes like acorns or walnuts or whatever, but that's because that's what it was fed. I do, however, believe in conservation breeding to keep history alive. I believe, I personally keep 3 distinct purebred lines of sheep in my flock. These sheep are too small, slow growing, and produce to produce perfect market lambs on a yearly basis. They do, however, each possess a set of characteristics that I want to pass on to a cross from these original lines. The cross that I breed is sold to the customers, which is super high quality. It's exactly what you want out of a market lamb. The purebred cull or harvest is what goes into my freezer or my friends and family. It's not that the meat isn't great. Some people think that Clun Forest is some of the best lamb out there. It just, they're slow growers. Their feed convergency, the feed conversion efficiency it's a lot lower. So to put it simply, I believe the small producers are better off focusing on excellent, pristine animal husbandry practices with heritage bacon breeds, or maybe a more modern cross of heritage breeds. The Livestock Conservancy Group, a group that does research, education, outreach, marketing, and genetic rescues to ensure the future of rare breed agriculture, defines heritage breeds to include animals that are a result of mating registered animals of 2 different heritage breeds. So I'll be crossing something like a large black with great fat and marbling with something faster growing with a large, long loin like a Tamworth, Yorkshire, Red Wattle. That way you've got hybrid vigor and all the best characteristics and can still market as heritage. I would stay away from raising something like a Mangalitsa unless A, you're a homesteader who wants a project and possibly wants to integrate livestock into a closed loop system. And for information on a closed loop system, we can talk more about that. B, you want to use Mangalitsas or other slow-growing lard hogs in a heritage crossbreeding program. Or C, you have a contract with chefs who can make margin at exorbitant prices by selling 1.5 ounces of Mangalitsa lardo, or, whatever you want to call it, for $20 a pop. As a consumer, if you're looking to feed your family or to fill your freezer with high-quality hogs, know your farmer if you can. I know it's not easy for everybody, but it is easy to go down to the farmer's market and talk to producers and find out what breed they are. Because if you're going to pay a premium per pound, be aware that that's hanging weight. That's skin, bones, fat, head, everything except viscera. You should know what kind of yield you're going to be getting, because in the end, if an animal weighs 400 pounds and you're buying a half and it's a 200 pound half, but you're only getting a 45% yield of actual edible material off of it, and everything else is just like lardo for you to whip at home or cure at home, or like, I don't know, have as a project of some sort. It's just not really filling bellies. The way I see it is, in the end, fussy charcuterie projects, lardo, pork cracklins, and head cheese don't fill the bellies of a family. Raw muscle weight does. So I don't know. Those are just some thoughts that I have on the artisanal pork industry, and I wanted to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit. So if you have any thoughts, questions, or further feedback on that, we'd love to hear it on the Facebook group, or get a hold of me or Travis or Ryan on Instagram.
So where I left off, the guy just picked up his pork. About 2 weeks went by, and he said, "Are you sure I got everything?" I said, "Yes." "Well, are you sure? Because I got a lot of fat, and I don't have that much chops. Are you sure there's not like a few boxes that are missing?" I assured him that nothing was misplaced and nothing mischievous was going on. Having worked in the cut and wrap industry for many years, I was not surprised when a farmer was unhappy with the results, especially a new farmer. The next day, I look up while I'm in the middle of cutting, and tapping on the window to the cut shop is our good friend, sidearm and all, is waving for me to meet him at the door. I met him with nervous anticipation. It's not often you meet someone who is visibly upset, who is openly carrying a handgun. Before I could even get the door shut behind me, I'm being talked at. Being told, this is not my pork, this is not my hog, that there must be a mistake. He is showing me a chop, one that I had packaged. It was tiny. He had his cut sheet in front of him and said, how did an animal that weighed this much produce such a small chop? Not only was he convinced that there was a couple boxes of meat that was not given to him, but he was convinced that we supplemented this to make up the weight in extra fat. I did not mention that I would have no desire or will to steal his pork. I get free pork. I get free better pork from my employer just gave me a half a hog a month earlier. Now, one thing to know about me is I take photos of a lot of the work I do. Anticipating an argument, I took photos of the entire slaughter process, the dressing process, what the animal looked like when it was hanging, what it looked like on the block, and yes, its huge 3-inch fat cap on top of a 2-inch pork chop. I showed him all of this, and by the end of our conversation, he was convinced. He did not turn that one pig into the Mangalisa empire that he foresaw for himself. There's a lesson here. It's something similar to don't count your chickens before they hatch, don't spend money you don't have, and don't tell a butcher you have the best pork he's ever seen. A simple Google search would have helped solve his problems before he even took on the responsibility of that one pig. This next piece is by Ryan.
So, at a shop I worked at, we had a large chalkboard prominently displayed, mounted on the wall at the front of this small retail whole animal butcher shop. We had a chalkboard artist who would come in time to time, draw out our advertisements for specials, etc. She was a very decent chalkboard artist. But there's one time I'm thinking of. She drew a pastoral scene with a red barn, cattle grazing in the pasture. I found it very telling. The choice of cattle breed she depicted was the black and white Holstein, a breed of cattle that is known for being a high-producing dairy breed. The cattle breeds we received at that meat shop were Black Angus crossed with Fleckvieh from one farmer, and also a Batavian hybrid from another farmer. In the case of this chalkboard artist, she simply knew very little about agriculture or livestock, and by depicting a Holstein, she tipped her cards to this fact. As it turned out, not a single customer nor my boss noticed there was anything ironic about depicting the most famous dairy breed as an advertisement in a high-end meat shop. Those of us who grew up estranged from livestock, those of us from metropolitan areas, may not have much of a frame of reference to think about and understand the spectrum of heritage breeds in domesticated animals. There are dairy breeds, meat breeds. There are dual-purpose breeds. There are miniature breeds. There are large-framed breeds. There are slow-growing breeds and fast-growing breeds, and on and on and on. You may not have grown up around livestock. It's likely you or your friends grew up around domestic house pets. Think of dogs, canines. Humans have been manipulating and engineering the genetics of their canine friends for a very, very long time. A greyhound has different attributes as compared with a Shih Tzu, as compared with a St. Bernard. There's the same long history of human engineering present in domesticated breeds of cattle, hogs, sheep, and goats. This is the first concept to understand. The second concept has to do with management and nutrition. Even if the best, most interesting, most potent genetics are in place, without a high level of expert management and nutrition, adequate nutritional intake, the potential that is in the animal's DNA will amount to very little. A Berkshire, a Mangalitsa, a Tamworth, an Angus, a Hereford, a Belted Galloway will still be stunted and unpalatable if not managed by a wise and knowledgeable farmer. A seed will not grow well without proper nutrition, sunlight, and water. We can compare again to the canine family. We all know that dogs who are worked well and trained well can do things like tree cougars. They can pull sleds in the Iditarod. They can retrieve waterfowl for a hunter. They can point, they can protect, and they can herd sheep. By the same token, we all know that these same athletic, high-performing canine breeds can become neurotic and poorly behaved when untrained and cooped up in an unnatural environment. Breed is not everything. Intelligent management must be paired with smart genetics. Let me repeat that. Breed is not everything. Intelligent management must be paired with smart genetics. Next, I'll read the Slow Food Group's text on the subject of biodiversity. When considering breeds or varietals of plants and animals, a discussion of biodiversity seems useful. They describe a certain perspective on farming and food culture. Of course, as always, please take these words with a grain of salt. Some of the ideas in practice have been criticized for being too elitist and unrealistic socioeconomically. As pertaining to our food system, Slow Food International summarizes in this way, quote, "Our food system is becoming increasingly industrialized. Every year, more family farms are disappearing and being replaced by factory farms. The result? Here's a couple bullet points. 1. More than 90% of varieties have disappeared from farmers' fields. 2. Half of the breeds of many domestic animals have been lost. 3. Just 3 companies process more than 70% of all United States beef. 4. More than 70% of large fish species have been overfished in the past century, with many fish populations virtually becoming extinct. 5. More than 80% of corn, 90% of soybean seeds are now patented by just one company. This approach to food is unhealthy for us, for the environment. It disconnects us from our cultural food traditions, presents a serious threat to the future of our food supply. Rich biodiversity is crucial to our food security. Without it, just one new virus or pest could decimate an entire plant or animal species, leaving us vulnerable to famine and destroying our planet's environmental stability." End quote. Okay, that's their short summary. Next, we'll dig deeper into the word biodiversity. What is biodiversity? At its essence, it signifies nature, life itself, and the diversity of life on many levels, from the smallest and most basic, like genes and bacteria, to animal and plant species, up to the most complex levels, ecosystems. All these levels intersect and influence each other and each other's evolution. Studies from the University of Stanford have compared species and varieties of an ecosystem to rivets that hold an airplane together. If we remove some of the rivets, for a while nothing will happen. The airplane will continue to operate, but little by little the structure will weaken, and at a certain point, removing just one more rivet will cause it to crash. Biodiversity is our insurance policy for the future, allowing plants and animals to adapt to climatic changes, attacks by parasites and disease, or to the unexpected. A system that is biologically varied is endowed with the antibodies to counter dangerous organisms and restore its own equilibrium. A system based on a limited number of varieties, on the other hand, is very fragile. The most famous example of this is the Irish potato famine of the mid-19th century. In 1845, a fungus attacked the potato crop, destroying entire harvests for many years and causing the death or emigration to the United States of 1.5 million people. This is Ryan now. As an aside, I should mention that my ancestry is Irish, and my ancestors emigrated to the United States during the time of the potato famine. The great Irish diaspora of the 1840s is why my forefathers came here. Wikipedia says that after 1840, immigration from Ireland became a massive, relentless, and efficiently managed national enterprise. In 1890, 40% of Irish-born people were living abroad. By the 21st century, an estimated 80 million people worldwide claimed some Irish descent, which included more than 36 million Americans who claimed Irish as their primary ethnicity. Why am I lingering on this piece of global emigration history? Because we as humans all inherit a genetic code, a genetic story resulting from the regional stressors and environmental situations our forefathers were forced to adapt to. We're not just white folks or black folks like a lot of us grew up thinking we were. It took a long time for me to figure this out. It took a process of relearning. There's something tragic about knowing that your people are broken and sad, but no one can remember why. There's something lost when we as humans forget about the specific cultural and regional adaptations embedded in our genetic code. In the same way, there's something lost when we forget about the diverse genetics of the animal and plant species we co-evolved with. Okay, back to the slow food text. The famine was the result of only a single variety of potato being cultivated in Ireland. The resistance that allowed Irish potatoes to strengthen and survive was a result of the diversity of the thousands of varieties of potatoes from the Andes and Mexico. Without this biodiversity, today potatoes would probably not be one of the main crops of the world. This episode was the first warning to humans of the dangers of genetic uniformity, but one that was unfortunately unheeded. The text goes on, continuing to summarize. Humans continue to destroy rainforests, allocate vast areas to monoculture, pave over the land, eliminate natural barriers, pollute waters and grounds with chemical pesticides and fertilizers, and accumulate plastics in the oceans. However, not all human activity destroys nature. The small-scale farmers, shepherds, fishers that know and respect the fragile balance of nature are the Earth's last true custodians. They have worked with and within their ecosystems over the millennia, changing them as they did so. If biodiversity disappears, what will happen to our food? Together with wild flora and fauna, many domesticated plants and animal breeds selected for their milk or meat will also disappear. According to the FAO, 75% of edible plant varieties have been irreversibly lost. In the U.S., the figure is 95%. Today, 60% of the world's food is based on 3 cereals: wheat, rice, and corn, but not on the thousands of rice varieties selected by farmers that once were cultivated in India and China, or on the thousands of varieties of corn that were grown in Mexico, but on the few hybrid varieties selected and sold to farmers by a handful of multinationals. Mechanization is the enemy of diversity. Industrial agriculture by nature needs uniformity and high productivity, in other words, monocultures. Since the 1950s, agriculture production has gradually oriented to depend on an ever small number of species and varieties selected to respond to the needs of the global market. They have no connection to individual territories, but rather are able to be produced in many possible environments, have good resistance to handling and transport, and a uniform taste. For example, in comparison to thousands of varieties of apples selected by farmers, only 4 commercial varieties represent 90% of the global market. Still, these varieties represent a great potential for the future of our agricultural systems. The varieties defined as native or local are the result of selections. natural or man-made, in specific areas. They are characterized by being well adapted to the environmental conditions of their area, and for this reason normally have fewer requirements for external inputs like water, fertilizers, or pesticides, because they are more rustic and therefore resistant to environmental stresses. Their potential to thrive in their original territories, like in deserts or the mountains, make them important agricultural resources and essential tools for food sovereignty. It's not a coincidence that these varieties are often connected to the culture of local community through customs, recipes, knowledge, dialect, etc. The first intention of the Slow Food Organization was to look after domestic biodiversity, also called agro-biodiversity, meaning not just the panda or the monk seal, but also the Caracatchen sheep. Not just the edelweiss, but also the horned potato of Bamberger. Plants and domestic animals have origins in several areas of the world. Potatoes and tomatoes in the Andes, goats and wheat in the Fertile Crescent, eggplant and pigs in Asia, etc. They have traveled the world and adapted to the climates and soils that they have found in every corner of the planet, changing a little, crossing with others, integrating into specific territories and communities, and influencing culinary traditions. Think of tomatoes. They were domesticated in the Andes and then crossed the ocean to then adapt to many European territories, diversifying into many different varieties and giving life to symbolic dishes of the Mediterranean, such as pizza, pasta with tomato sauce, Greek salad, and gazpacho. This is how in 10,000 years of the history of agriculture, farmers' knowledge has given life to thousands of varieties and breeds that are the expression of cultural diversity and the ecology of a territory, which in turn has given rise to a great diversity of gastronomy. Diversity shown through shapes, tastes, scents, colors, recipes, preparations, and rituals. A fundamental richness to protect the culture of a community, but also to guarantee a diet that is varied, enjoyable, and healthy. It is the goal of slow food to catalog plant and animal species, but also processed products, because together with plant and animal biodiversity and economic, social, and cultural heritage in the form of cheeses, cured meats, breads, and sweets is also disappearing. Created to conserve fresh food like milk, meat, fish, grains, and fruits, the number of processed products is infinite, the result of knowledge passed from generation to generation in every corner of the world. The result of creativity and craftsmanship. The smallest variations can give life to very diverse products. Think of the thousands of types of cheeses originating from the same three ingredients: milk, rennet, and salt. Or cured meats, where sometimes the only thing that changes is the butchering technique, a spice, or the wood used for smoking. Artisanal techniques of transforming foods allow us to obtain a particular products that, even more than the raw ingredients, tell the story of a local culture, while leaving the producers less affected by seasonal cycles or the fluctuations of the market. It is possible to safeguard local plant and animal varieties by promoting and selling the processed products associated with them. A cheese, a cured meat can save a livestock breed. A bread can save a type of grain, etc. To preserve the rich heritage, Slow Food created something called the Ark of Taste as a place to record, before they are lost, plant species, animal breeds, and artisanal products such as breads, cheeses, or cured meats that are tied to the cultures, histories, and traditions of communities around the world. Right on. Thanks for listening.
When I was first getting into this industry, I wanted to absorb everything that I possibly could. This old timer, John Steins, who was a major influence in my learning, would quiz me. He'd be like, all right, what's the name of this cut? And I would tell him. Then he'd be like, all right, what's the name of it in the NAP guide? And I'd tell him, he'd be like, all right, what's the name of it in this other country? And he would finally keep asking me something about the same cut until I got it wrong. He was a fourth generation farmer, butcher. He was good, very skilled with the knife. He's the one who told me my favorite phrase that I say today, talking about the artisanal revival and all this shit, is that, like, you know, if you had to move a pile of dirt with a tractor versus a shovel and have the same result, then why wouldn't you do it where it's easier? And that's how I feel about well saws versus hand saws versus band saws, etc. But part of my education through him was animal breeds and understanding different breeds and what they were, from European double muscle beef that we'd get occasionally, which is a weird looking animal, to Highlanders and what I used to refer to as Oreo cookie cows, which are belted Galloways. Both of those animals are great for clearing barren, hard, overgrown pastures. And Highlanders are by far the most beautiful looking beef out there, with their long hair, and they just look majestic. But they're also the most difficult to slaughter because their hair is so long, and they have a thick hide on their head. So I have had a misknock on one of them under USDA inspection. It was a terrible time. He taught me how Herefords used to be the beef industry standard up until the Angus campaign in the 80s. And then the Angus campaign turned into the Black Angus, and how there's black and red Angus, and there's cross to what you would find typical dairy cows. You know, Holsteins are good for milk, where Jerseys are good for buttermilk, more rich dairy products. We would be unloading animals, or there would be something on the rail, and he would say, "All right, Travis, what's that?" And I'd be like, "Oh, it's a Charolais or a Blue Belgium." Playing this game was easy when they'd come in off the trailer. When I was moved off the kill floor and put into the cut room, John was right there next to me. The animals coming in on the rail, this game took on a whole new meaning. I could associate the breeds and what their meat would look like. "All right, Travis, what's this?" "Dexter." And this one, Beefalo. And this one, a Brahmal. Those breeds were bred and developed for certain specifications that may have been lost and may not be held by the farmers these days. But I appreciate it on the sole fact of helping expand my education and knowledge of this industry. And I encourage anyone who works in a cut and wrap facility to force themselves to play this game, or force other people to play it as well. I know a lot of butchers don't want to think about what the animal was like when it was alive, but it's important to understand the quality and the product of what you have in front of you. And by knowing this understanding, when a farmer brings you a Mangalitsa pig, you can know right away that he is going to be disappointed with his expectations. And you could remind yourself to take pictures of the entire process. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Meat Block Podcast. And I just want to say, if you raise Mangalitsa, we're not shitting on it to just shit on it. It produces beautiful quality meat, and it's great for curing, and it's great for charcuterie. But people just need to know what they expect, that not everybody has an outlet for the byproduct, or what I would consider byproduct that you may consider yield. If you want to get a hold of us here at The Meat Block, the best way to do that is to email us at themeatblockpodcast@gmail.com. You could tweet us at The Meat Block Pod, or you could reach us on Instagram, which is going to be the most effective way, at The Meat Block. If you want to get a hold of Ryan, he is at Gather and Break on Instagram. David is at A Farm Butcher on Instagram. And I am at American Butcher on Instagram and Facebook. And if you want to be a part of our community and discussions, then head over to Facebook, type in The Meat Block, and join the Facebook page, because there is a lot of great conversation happening over there. And if you're looking for ways to support the show, honestly, the best way to do that right now is to tell a friend, or leave a 5-star review or comment on iTunes. Just like Iron Eagle, DC'd or F, or Skadge Sandwich, or STK Sandwich, who left us an amazing review. Also, you could tag us on social media, like Instagram using the hashtag #TheMeatBlock, or tagging our page directly, just like Basic Butcher, Simon the Butcher, and also good luck Simon in the upcoming WBC. He is a member of the Great Britain team. Episodes in WHIP right now is a interview with Rob Slater, president of the WBC, and the American team, who will be representing America in the WBC as well. And if you don't know what the WBC is, it is the World Butchers Challenge. Go back and listen to one of our earlier episodes where I interview Rod, and we'll talk about it more in the future. It is our Olympics, people. Anyway, keep your knives sharp and live in the margin.